What is going on, and welcome to another episode of the Time Killers Podcast, a show about games, movies, and everything else we kill time with. My name's Neil Rivera, and I'm killing time with a man who once again finds himself stranded on a hostile alien planet. It's Matthew Field.
I do love an alien planet.
Matthew, how did this keep happening to you? You know, like first, we're playing Pragmata, you're stuck on the moon. Now you're playing Aphelion and you're stuck on this planet called Prometheus and like terrible things are happening. What's going on?
Yeah, there might be something to dissect there about my love of planets other than Earth.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about Aphelion. This is the latest from Life is Strange creator Don't Nod. I've also played through and beaten Mouse PI for Hire, which is that 1930s rubber hose boomer shooter that everyone's been talking about, much anticipated. Speaking of much anticipated, Matthew has been playing the IGF Grand Prize winner Titanium Court from AP Thompson, co-designer of Consumi, which came out last year. And then I have also been playing Vampire Crawlers, which is the sort of pseudo sequel follow-up to Vampire Survivors, which came out a few years ago. So we've got a big show planned for you guys. Neil, or I hear you saying in your head, Neil, you've been posting on videos of Blue Sky of you playing Saros. You're clearly playing Saros. Why aren't you talking about Saros? We're going to talk about Saros on the next episode. Matthew hasn't started it yet, but he has been playing through Returnal. He's going to pick up and start playing Saros in the interim between this episode and next episode. I have been playing Saros. I will probably beat Saros by the time we record. So yeah, look forward to our Saros review on the next episode. But in the meantime, you can listen to past episodes. Find us on your social network of choice at timekillerspod.com. We want you to be part of the show, be part of this community that we're building. DM us your questions, your comments, and hot takes. Whatever you guys are feeling in the moment, we'll pick our favorites and we'll answer them right here on this show. And then don't forget to subscribe to us on whatever podcast platform that you're listening to us on. Leave us a review and just let us know how much you love Matthew and I talking about video games and movies here. And just let Matthew know, see if you can diagnose like what's going on with Matthew in this like getting lost in space situation. Okay. That's enough of that. Let's get into some games here. Let's talk Mouse PI for Hire. So this is one that if you're on social media, you've probably seen this on your feed. It is the second sort of rubber hose animation game to sort of like come out here, right? Like obviously the first one that came out was Cuphead, but this one sort of goes in a different direction as Cuphead, where that one was sort of a tough as nails platformer. Mouse PI for Hire is more or less like a film noir, detective noir story, starring Detective Jack Pepper, who's this like, returning war hero, comes home, sets up his own private investigator's office, and you go out and solve mouse crimes in this sort of fictional mouse world. Obviously draws a lot of inspiration from, classic, Mickey Mouse and, Steamboat Willie, like I said, rubber hose animation. But beneath all of that is essentially a Doom style boomer shooter, very fast paced, lots of different weapons arsenals. So like, even though you're playing a detective, quote unquote, you're doing mostly shooting in this game. So yeah, I've played through it. I've beaten it. And by and large, I enjoyed it. I think it's mostly it's a good game. Obviously the standout, like the thing that sort of first jumps out when you boot it up is the art style, which is amazing, right? Like it is sort of that Cuphead style, animation. I'm going to say Cuphead a lot, but it's rubber hose, just the cartoon style like that. That's just, I don't know. I can't get like, if that's a trend that's starting in games right now, like I can totally get behind it because it looks amazing. The animation is really, really well done. And yeah, I mean, like the art, I think is certainly a strength of this game. Where I really struggled was the gameplay. I think, this is a game that really sort of markets itself and sells itself on its vibe. But beneath that, it's kind of just merely functional, right? Like it is just like if you've played the modern Doom games, it plays very, very similar to that, where you kind of just have a weapon wheel. You're selecting, a variety of different weapons. Most of them are pretty standard. But then you have alt fires, things like that, that sort of mix up the combat. And yeah, so I mean, like, I think, I come down on it feeling like kind of like it's okay. I think the gameplay is good. It's serviceable is what I'll say is like what I'll classify it as. And then, obviously the art direction is really good. And the writing, I think the writing is sort of hit or miss, right? Like I think the writing it's strong at times when it's not taking itself too seriously, when it's making jokes. Like I think there's one of the strengths to the writing in my mind is that there's a lot of, sort of inside jokes with the gaming community. There's a one-liner about like game journalists being bad at playing video games. So, like they clearly understand like who the target audience is and they have a lot of fun with that. I just think the actual like mouse, like the world and like the things that are going on, like while the vibe is really cool, like I just don't think that there's much to the story, right? So yeah, I come down on it feeling like it's a good game. I think given all of the hype like leading up to it, right? Like obviously the art, the reveals for this like sort of had like a big pop, a lot of Cuphead comparisons. I don't think it sort of lives up to like what Cuphead did. I think Cuphead did some like really interesting and cool things within the platformer space where this plays it more safe, with like the boomer shooter mechanics. It's very much like a run-of-the-mill boomer shooter.
Yeah, that's kind of the impression I've gotten from it, just from in watching the reveal trailers and a few streams. Like it's one of those, and I honestly felt similarly about Cuphead, although I know Cuphead was much more like well regarded for its gameplay as well. But it's like such an eye-catching visual, and then you look at what's actually going on in the gameplay, and I'm like, I'm not sure this is for me. And in the case of Mouse PI specifically, it looks like the art style does not lend itself to what is actually taking place. When you look at his kick, like it looks like the art style may make it hard to gauge distances and such, in a way that would like be a detriment to the gameplay. Did you butt up against situations where you felt like not only was the gameplay just kind of but like was the art style ever actively working against what was taking place and what you were being told to do?
I wouldn't say the art style specifically. I mean, I do think, like one thing I will say is that the boomer shooter genre is surprisingly crowded these days. Like there are a lot of games that are dropping. Proteus is one that has come out recently. There's Warhammer 40K put out Bolt Gun. They're dropping Bolt Gun 2. So all that to say that like there are games that are in this space doing things with similar art styles, maybe not necessarily the rubber hose art style, but like 2D pixelated, there's that similar kind of feel. So I don't think any of my like gameplay difficulty stemmed from like the art style directly, more so I think there's issues with like level design. I think by and large I didn't have too much trouble, but there were some sequences, especially toward the end, where it seems like they are shoving way too many enemies into too small of a space, so your mobility's limited. The field of view gets really crowded. I don't want to say that as like, oh my god, like this was like emblematic of my entire experience. But yeah, I mean, I think it's less on the art style and just more so on the fact that like they made a boomer shooter, but they didn't make like a standout one. Like I don't come back to like the level design or the combat design. I think of something like a Doom where, you have that combat chess where you have all of these different enemy types and they all have different strengths and weaknesses and different abilities that you kind of have to account for. There's none of that here. They're kind of just basic, they're all sort of, JPEGs that you're blasting until they disappear. And yeah, I mean, like, I don't think there's like, I think gameplay wise, I don't think there's anything bad about it. Like there's nothing that I'm like, oh man, like this just doesn't feel good. There's just nothing that felt new or innovative or even exciting. Like it was all very much like I felt like I was going through the motions when I was playing it.
Does it evolve over the course of the runtime? Like, I think everything I've seen has been pretty much towards the beginning of the game. Like, obviously with like Doom, you're fighting like progressively more and larger enemies as you progress through the game. along with like some pretty cool bosses. Like, does it have any of those progression, um, mechanics, or is it are you pretty
Yeah.
much doing the same thing?
It mostly a little bit of both, I would say. I do want to shout out the boss fights. I do, I didn't mention them. Like, I think the boss fights are all pretty good. Like I said, nothing too like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. A couple where I had some frustration points as well. But as far as like the weapon, like the weapon progression, I think everything, they give you is sort of like standard run of the mill. You've got a pistol, you've got a shotgun, you've got a double barreled shotgun, you've got a Tommy gun, right? Like these are all very like standard run of the mill boomer shooter weapons. And they add the alt fire, which sort of gives it that extra like, but none of the alt fire modes really felt like they added much. I will say there are some weapons towards the end of the game that do sort of like introduce fun and new ideas. Really, the only sort of like thing that sort of stands out as I look back at it is just the death animations, right? Like you have a gun that spits out acid, and that results in like a really fun and quirky like death animation from the enemies. So really, that's sort of the peak gameplay here is just seeing like the way that the guns and like the way that the guns and the animation influence each other.
And that makes sense. I mean, again, like part of it comes down to the visuals, and the visual style is the main draw here. So, I mean, at least they leaned into that. It seems like a little bit. Yeah. I mean, beyond that, I guess like this is billed as a like you have PI as in private investigator in the title. Do you get most of the gameplay being a shooter? Are you actually doing any kind of investigation here, or are you doing anything like you would typically associate with investigators? I do want to shout out, I think the lockpick mechanic looks pretty unique and interesting, the way they've made a little puzzle out of that, which I guess you could associate it as a private investigator activity. But beyond that, are you doing much, detective work?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you called out the lockpicking, because that was probably the most I felt like this was like, oh my gosh, like a cool new idea.
Yeah.
Because it was a lot of fun, and they do iterate and evolve on that throughout the game as well. So yeah, not all bad in that regard. But yeah, as far as like the PI angle, story wise, like obviously there's missions where you're sort of doing the like collecting clues and things like that. I never really got the sense that I was, I never felt like I was performing an investigation. There are, there's like a hub world that you return to in between missions, or like like a main, like your main sort of base of operations. And there is a, what is it, like a case board, similarly to like how you would build out in Alan Wake, and like that was such a like a centralized mechanic. This is sort of in that, like they're sort of doing something similar with that, though it is more like it's less hands-on, where you're like, if you don't feel like as though you're cracking the case, you're just taking all of the clues that you collect in between each, in the mission, and then you're just slapping it up there. And as you put certain pieces of evidence together or on the board, it'll sort of unlock other missions and things for you to go do. So it's PI light is what I will say.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I'm glad they at least did, some of that in there, even though it's a little bit more, it's obviously more of a shooter than anything else, but I'm glad they've at least got some of the investigation stuff in there, because that's the stuff that's more interesting to me, not that I'm expecting like LA Noire out of this or anything, but
Right.
If you're going to call yourself a private investigator, you should at least have a bit of that in the gameplay.
Yeah, and I mean, there's definitely like, I think there's something to be said about sort of the how disjointed the boomer shooter mechanics feel from like the act or the art of being a private investigator. So yeah, I think adding some of that stuff in there definitely helps. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good game. I didn't mention, right, like this is developed by Fumi Games. It's published by Playside Studios. It's Fumi Games' first game, it's their debut title, and I think it's a really good like first stab at it, and I think there's a lot of room for them to iterate and improve and expand, right, like different weapon types. I think really like in the next game, if there is another one, it's something that they can get like really silly with in terms of like just the weapons, and just kind of lean into it a little bit more, where this one I think plays it a little bit too straight at times. But yeah, I mean, overall, I really enjoyed it. You know, another thing I didn't mention is that, you know, obviously Troy Baker is the lead in this role. I think he does a great job. You know, obviously you can't, it's hard to come up with sort of criticisms of Troy Baker at this point. You know, he sort of crushes it in everything he does. But yeah, I think he does a solid job here. Once again, I think the writing is hit or miss, but I think he does well with what he's given. But yeah, I mean, I enjoyed, you know, Mouse PI for Hire. It's out now. It came out on April 16th. It's out on the Switch 2, PS5, PC, and Series X. So essentially everywhere. It's not a Switch 1 title, but more or less anywhere. And yeah, so I mean, if you're into, ultimately, like my sort of like closing statement is like, if you like boomer shooters, I think you'll enjoy this. I think you'll have a good time with it. It just may not revolutionize or change the way that you feel about boomer shooters in any way. Yeah.
Seems like an enjoyable time.
Enjoyable time for the sickos like me who like a good, just, you know, run around and shoot stuff game. So yeah, hard to find something to complain about, you know, too much about it when, yeah, I'm just running around killing stuff. But that's Mouse PI for Hire. Let's move on to Aphelion. So Matthew, like I said, this is Don't Nod, the people that brought us Life is Strange, the original sort of creators of Life is Strange. And now they are tackling, you know, they've kind of been on a weird run lately where they're dropping all these new IPs, and in that sort of run that brings us to Aphelion, which is an interesting, you know, game, mainly because it's, you know, it's obviously it's another Lost in Space game, but with this one, like a big sort of marketing push was that they partnered with the European Space Agency, like got an actual, like, you know, like they got the rights to use like ESA like logos and equipment and stuff like that. So that was like a big push from them. So yeah, I mean, like outside, like I'll kind of like leave that, you know, like the stage setting to you, Matthew. But yeah, talk me through your time with Aphelion.
Yeah, so like as you described, this is basically another lost on an alien planet type story here. In this case, there are two astronauts who are, oh gosh, I'm blanking on their names here. I'll come up with them in just a minute. But essentially there's some interpersonal drama between them, as you're told in the opening cutscene. They were, you know, basically a couple at one point, and then have broken up. And then their spaceship promptly crashes as it gets ready to, land on Planet 9, which is, a fictional planet that they call it Persephone, but it's as if it is the ninth planet in our solar system. That's just like far out there and orbiting at a super distant orbit. So far that we haven't discovered it yet, or something like that.
Gotcha.
And so there is a and the game is split up into gameplay through each where you're playing as each of the two of them, and their gameplay sections are slightly different. And like as you mentioned, there's this partnership with ESA, which is the European Space Agency. They even came up with like a mission patch, like they have like NASA mission patches.
Oh,
like,
that's cool.
They did an official one for that, and you can go on the ESA website and they have like a page for it saying like, launching in 2060 and the game takes place in like 2061 or something.
Oh,
so they really did the full tie in there, which I think is a nice touch. I kept waiting for that to kind of come out in some more overt or obvious way within the game. And it didn't really for me in a noticeable way. Like it's possible that the suits they're wearing are official, and like some of the technology that was on the spaceship that crashed was official ESA stuff. But as a layperson who is not really familiar with the intricacies of that, it's hard to know exactly where that partnership extended to outside of some of the mentions. Their name dropped in there in the patch and stuff like that.
we're American too, right? So like if you know, like,
Yeah.
I'm sure if they did, like if they partnered with NASA, it might have been a little bit more. But yeah, like that was going to be one of my questions was like, does the like does that lend it like a level of realism or? But like I feel like you kind of answered it, you know, like it just doesn't really seem like it's just kind of there and like it gives it like the extra like
Yeah.
level of like, oh, this is like a real thing, but like it doesn't go beyond that.
They definitely play it straight. Like it is
Yeah,
presented as a scientific game. They're on a scientific mission. There's actual, science on the whiteboards that you find, that kind of thing. Like they play it straight, which mostly works. I think it rubs up against some of the mechanics in a weird way, which, one of them being the fact that there is an alien monster that you encounter throughout this game. That's not a spoiler. That's like in the posters and it's been in all the pre-release material. But there is essentially like kind of like a black smoke like monster that you encounter in some sequences, and those basically become stealth sequences.
gotcha.
So that's not exactly tying into the like raw sciencey aspect to this, as well as there are the way they kind of explain it is like there's these like weird magnetic lines tracing over the planet that you can see when you attune your scanner to a particular frequency, and sometimes these magnetic lines get blocked by other frequencies and you have to go to these like nexus points and break them apart,
Okay.
which is a clever way of just making you kind of like break down barriers that you wouldn't otherwise be able to use to progress. So like they weave these kind of scientific explanations into what would be considered kind of more fantastical gameplay elements.
Yeah.
And I think it works. It works okay. I like it. Didn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't like you can tell that it's not real science, but they do a decent enough job explaining it to where it's not that much further off than what you would find in like other science fiction stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I think that's a good sort of like segue into your just sort of overall, thoughts on the game, right? Like we've sort of talked about the, multiple protagonists, which by the way, I got names, Ariane and Tomas. I'm going to say Tomas because I'm assuming European.
Tomas, yes, yeah.
Yep, nailed it. Yeah, so I mean, like, obviously you have the different gameplay mechanics. There's obviously the more narrative focus, which, like they're grounding it more realism. So how does it all come together? How did you feel about it after you beat it?
Yeah, I think I came down pretty positively. I think I enjoy it. Like for one thing, I should say I'm predisposed to like games like this. This
Yeah.
is a large part of this game is you are engaging in kind of like Tomb Raider / Uncharted style, like climbing.
Yeah.
Not
Okay.
breaking any new ground there. A lot of yellow paint or white paint or whatever telling you where to go and how to progress. It is what it is. You know exactly how it feels and how it plays. When that rock kind of breaks underneath your grip, you press the button to hang on. Like it's stuff that's been done before.
Right.
I think what makes it work for me is like the planet itself and how like well realized this kind of icy, foreign, undiscovered like rock in space is,
Yeah.
and how well they kind of characterize it. And this is a good time for me to mention. I think this is definitely in the AA game budget arena here, but there are some like visuals that were surprised me with how good they were. Like this is not going to be
Really?
used on this isn't going to be used on like an Unreal 5 engine, trailer or anything,
Mm-hmm.
but the faces, the face capture, and the animations that they used for rendering the faces and cutscenes were excellent. And you also have some really good like touches when you're moving throughout the environment. Like if you fall into the snow, like you get snow stuck on your suit that like gets knocked off
Nice.
over time. So yeah, the whole visual aspect of it was much better than I was expecting it to be. And I think in this case it was money well spent, so to speak, in that it really helped kind of the immersion in the whole planet, which I think was the main selling point for me here.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it, like this is what draws you to being, stranded on these planet is just, like the immersion, the beauty, the terror, right?
Yeah, I mean it's compelling. Like this was a pretty propulsive game. It's not very long. It was maybe like 8 hours for me, and I did a little bit of looking around for like extra audio logs and stuff. Um,
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. Like it was one where when I'm sitting down to play something, it was one that my mind went to first. I wanted to see
Yeah.
the end. I wanted to see the story through and figure out what happened. And it mostly delivered. I think the story ended up leaving me wanting more, but in a good way. Like it
Oh, good.
concluded at a spot where like it wraps up the story that was being told, but it kind of raised some additional questions. I don't think this is a game that's going to be getting a sequel.
Right.
I for one thing, I don't know really. You have to kind of shoehorn the story in. And the other thing is, I don't think this is like done that well commercially,
Yeah.
from what I gather.
Yeah, like the critically and commercially, right? Like the reviews were kind of all over the place. Steam reviews were mixed, but like I'm glad that you came down positively on it. And I mean, obviously, like I think that kind of leads me into the questions that I had, which I'm going to combine them. You've played some of Don't Nod's more recent games. I remember you played through Banishers. Am I right in remembering that?
I Banishers ended up being very long, much longer than I felt it needed to be.
Okay.
So I did not see it all the way through the end. I did play probably like 25 to 30 hours of it. Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, they've kind of been like like I sort of mentioned at the beginning of this segment, like they've kind of been on this like post Life is Strange, like, kind of been in the post Life is Strange. I don't want to call it the wilderness because like Banishers came out and like reviewed well. I forget what their last game was, but it came out and like reviewed like modestly well. Like, their games review like decently well. How does this compare in your mind to something like a Banishers or, and do you see this being something that it ever gets seen on the same level as like a Life is Strange?
Yeah, so Don't Nod at this point, they have at least two different teams making games. One team is making more of the kind of like third person action game, which I would classify Banishers and Vampire, which honestly was such an underrated game. We can talk about Vampire another time because I think that was like such a slept on game and had so many cool ideas. One of the maybe my favorite vampire game ever. So I think they have the team making those third person kind of games, and then you have the team that's making teams that are making the Life is Strange style games where you had like Tell Me Why, which is actually I don't know if it's the same director. So this was Aphelion was made by the same director as Tell Me Why. A game that I did not finish. Tell Me Why. I think I played a couple of the episodes, but didn't finish it. So yeah, they try a lot of different things. They go in a lot of different directions. I like Don't Nod games because they are. They feel like mechanically maybe they're not breaking new ground, but they put a strong emphasis on narrative, and they aren't really afraid to tell some stories that are different than what you find in most games. I guess you could argue that now like the Life is Strange style story is there are a lot of games attempting that now, but at the time it was pretty novel. So
yeah, I mean, I give them credit for sort of kicking off that trend. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I think I like their games for that. And, it's similar to the Life is Strange. I do think Aphelion, has some, it tends to be it touches on like melodrama a little bit, with some of the, with some of the dialogue. I think like both these characters are like, the anti Sam Porter Bridges, like when they're running around on their own, they're talking constantly. Which I could do if I was gonna say like I would fix one thing about this game, that would probably be it. Just make them talk a little bit less to themselves.
Yeah.
Not all the way down, but just like a little bit. Just give me a little bit of quiet, you know. And they so it's a dramatic in that way. Like it's very much, if you've played a Don't Nod game, this is very recognizably, you know, some of their work.
Yeah. And speaking of Don't Nod and their work and what they've done before, I want to touch on, the horror segments, because we do have a community question. Our friend Graydon Webb over on Blue Sky asks, or he tells us that, he's been playing Aphelion. He absolutely loves it. He'd love to hear our thoughts on it shifting to the horror stealth segments amidst the narrative driven adventure game. So you mentioned like it's a new thing for them to try, but he thinks that it's worked out great. What did you think of the horror sequences?
I thought they were a neat experiment. I don't think there were, to their credit, they didn't stuff it full of these sequences to where like you get sick of them. There are enough to for you to like, when you see one coming, you know that, okay, this is one of those. I know what I'm going to have to do here.
Right.
I think it begins to kind of wear out its welcome at the very end, and kind of like the largest and biggest one of these is at the end of the game, where I think that got a little bit, their reach extended their grasp. Like the sequence was too long for what the mechanics would allow them to explore, like, new angles on. But for the most part, I think it worked. I think it was a nice diversion in breaking up some of the more typical platforming sequences here. I thought it was pretty good. They weren't my favorite sequences of the game, but I didn't mind them.
It's forced stealth sequences in games are tough, especially when you're combining them with other elements, whether it be, in this case, narrative or, exploration, or something, akin to like a Spider-Man. Like my mind goes to those Mary Jane missions. So, it seems like they at least didn't make something that was on that level of like irritating. It was, it seemed a little bit more manageable.
No, yeah. I agree with that. Yeah, it didn't break up the pacing in a way that was like, jarring or anything like that. And again, it's not a super long game. So there's a limited number of these sequences, and, I liked them for what they were.
Yeah. And that's, it took you 7 hours to beat, right? And, it wasn't a, episodic, right? Like it was just play it straight through.
Straight through. Yeah. I think, it's between 7 and 8, maybe. Not too long.
Well, cool. That's Aphelion, y'all. It is, it's out already. It's on PS5, PC, and Xbox Series consoles. It's also available on Game Pass to you at no extra charge if you're a Game Pass subscriber. So get in there, check it out, and if you're a fan of these narrative adventure games, it seems like this one should at least speak to you on some level. All right, Matthew, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, you're going to stay in the hot seat, and we're going to talk about Titanium Court, and then after that, I'll talk about Vampire Crawlers, but stay right there. We'll be right back. And we are back. Matthew, I've been looking forward to this part of the episode, honestly, since I put this doc together, because I don't know what the hell Titanium Court is. This is a game that I've been hearing, it's been making a lot of rounds in the video game journalist space. If you're chronically online like I am, you have seen and heard a lot about this game. So this is solo developed by AP Thompson, kind of a prolific solo developer right now. Like I said, he co-developed Consume Me, which is an indie game that dropped last year, releasing this on his own. But it's hyped. It's like hype is sort of the word that I keep coming to, at least as far as like those in the sort of like insider space. So Matthew, you've been playing it. It's about 7 hours, or that you've played of it. I guess I hadn't really given. I guess I should give the elevator pitch of like what I've seen. I feel like that might be the most interesting
Yeah, let's
angle
do
here.
that. Yeah.
So the description I've got is that it's a surreal strategy and match 3 puzzle role playing game. But really, it seems like there's definitely match 3. Like that seems to be the sort of core mechanic that you're engaging with. So think Candy Crush and those sort of puzzle style games. But there's also like city building and like RPG stuff, and like it's all sort of wrapped in this weird like ethereal like art style, and it's also got this quirky weird like like I would say like art house film vibe to it. So Matthew, I feel like I've butchered the premise of this game enough. Why don't you tell me in your own words what Titanium Court is, based on what you've played so far?
Yeah, I think, I mean, you're not that far off. I think what's interesting here is how you can describe it the way you described it, and different things will pop into people's head as to what that actually means to them. The Steam description for this game is simply a surreal strategy game for clowns and criminals, which that, along with the fact that they like literally make a mockery of the game in their Steam screenshot images, tells you a lot about the type of game this is, the type of humor it's working with, and just generally what the vibe of it is.
It doesn't seem to take itself too seriously, despite the sort of pedigree that it's got behind
Not
it.
at all. Not at all. I mean, you hear like, okay, this is the IGF, grand prize winner. It's being critically lauded as like an important indie game. And then you boot it up, and basically the first thing they tell you is like the stage play that is the kind of narrative framing for what's going on is incomplete, and the script is still being written, and oh yeah, the main character is going to be played by an understudy, which it just like throws all this at you right on the jump, and you're kind of like, what is going on here? So I would break it down like this. I think before we get started here, if any of this is sounding like super interesting to you, like something that is piquing your interest, I would say just go play it. I think it's something that is unique enough to where if it sounds at all intriguing to you, you should go play it. I think it's easier to say who this is not for. What I can start by saying is that what I would consider like the biggest inspiration to the framing here is Shakespeare's Midsummer's Night's Dream. With the like fairy court and the sort of like fourth wall breaking and very kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Like tricky characters who are like a little bit always hiding something and not being very forthcoming, and kind of being like mischievous and like tricky with their words and what they're telling you, giving you half truths and incomplete information, that sort of thing. And if that doesn't sound interesting to you, the game is not for you. If you are, I mean, it doesn't really even matter if you are a fan or not a fan of Match 3 games. Despite Match 3 being the core gameplay mechanic here, there are so many different things you're doing in the course of like a gameplay loop that the Match 3 sequences are not even like, I would say it's less than 50% of what you're doing here. Like there's just a lot of sections where you're doing different things.
Yeah. So talk me through some of those different things, right? Like walk us through like what's that extra 50% look like beyond just the Match 3? Like what other gameplay mechanics are at play here?
Yeah. So the core loop here is that you are in charge of the Titanium Court, a court of fairies who every day must go to war with other courts or other like factions in the world, essentially. And so that is what is essentially a run in this structure here. So you start by picking a class, which is what they consider like what they call a job, because it's how you earn coins, which is one of the primary currencies that you're using in a run. You only start with one, which is your basic job, which says like when you destroy an enemy castle or like structure during the battle sequence, you get a coin or whatever. Then you eventually, over the course of gameplay, will unlock others, such as the one where it's something of youth, but essentially it's referring to cigarettes, and where you basically at the beginning of every gameplay or war sequence, you burn everything around you, and the fire just kind of like spreads out from there. And then another one where you earn money only by trading with the market. And each of these have different starting units that you can build. But I'm getting a little off track here. So you start off as you pick your job, and then you pick a map to go to in like a typical kind of, think like you're picking a map that's either mostly grass or mostly trees or mostly water, and those are your resources. So you drop into the map, and in the first phase, it is the match 3 phase. So you are matching tiles on this grid. It's like, I think like a 7x7 grid. And anytime you match a tile of a particular resource, you get one of that resource. So if you match 3 waters, you get 1 water resource or whatever. If you happen to get a match 4, then you get 2. And if you can chain them together. And if you chain them together, this sequence is extended further, so you can collect more and more resources. And as you're making moves, this meter is depleting.
Okay.
Cleverly here, there are certain sequences, or they're like, you have to also strategize as you're collecting these resources. You have to think about your position of your court unit on this battlefield, essentially, because at the end of the sequence, all the tiles are going to be locked in, and then you're going to have to battle with whatever arrangement they're in. So one strategy...
This is the same, sorry to interrupt you, this is the same match 3 tile where it'll essentially lock and then it changes?
Yes. So once the meter expires and you've matched as many 3 as you can, whatever is left, wherever those tiles are on the grid at that point, they condense and they lock in, and then that's what you've got to deal with for the next phase. So the next phase is one where you can then open up any chests that were available on the map, trade with any markets or shops that are available, and then also create your units that will spawn. And this is not happening in real time. This is all basically like in a pause menu, essentially. And so maybe if you've done a good job of arranging the tiles in the previous sequence, maybe you have like water tiles on 3 or all 4 sides of your court, meaning that ground units will not be able to get over that water to get to you and attack you. Or maybe there's a lot of mountains and units move slower over mountains, or some can't move over mountains at all. So you have those kind of considerations to take into account as you are, as you're matching in the previous sequence.
Yeah. It's not necessarily about clearing out everything, but also like leaving room for leaving us layout in a certain way to benefit you in the next phase.
Exactly. And then, so at this point, you once you've got all your resources and have traded everything, you can spawn your units in. And on the left-hand side, you have this like where the meter was that was showing how much time you had left to match 3. It's going to show you when enemy units will spawn. So you know exactly when each enemy placement is going to spawn their warrior units or their worker units or whatever in the war phase. And you spawn all of yours at the beginning in the order that you designate. And so at this point, like you queue up your units, and you're strategizing because you want to basically, you can't control these units directly. And this is the key point here, in that they're going to spawn from your court, and they're going to do whatever their unit is like programmed to do. So like You have some that are defensive units that will just defend your court and will attack anybody that comes close. But otherwise, they're just kind of like either collecting a certain resource or not doing anything. And then you'll have others that will just go off and attack whatever is closest. And so there's a bit of trial and error here as you learn how these units behave exactly. Because you'll realize that certain units they're going to attack whatever's closest, so they may not get you can't force them to attack the one that's going to spawn a unit that would attack you first. And you just kind of let them go, and then you after you've queued everything up, you click play and then you watch how it all plays out. You see how many kills you get, and then you see how much damage you take or anything else like that.
Interesting.
And then so those are essentially the mechanical phases. Interspersed with all of this, and sometimes like literally in between rounds, you're getting commentary from people in your court telling you about mechanics or lore or jokes or just whatever. They're popping up to talk about whatever is happening. Occasionally you'll come across like certain weird units on the board. Like there's a joke where there's like you can spawn a giant jar, and there's a running joke where like all of the units get distracted by trying to open the jar. Essentially, they'll ignore all the other enemies and just like try to open the jar. And it's just that kind of off the wall humor that you're either going to stick for you or it's not.
Has it stuck for you so far? Like, what do you make of the because like the trailer is very it's definitely got a like, I don't know, a tone that it's going for. It's very silly. But yeah, like what did you make of it, or what have you made of it so far?
Yeah, I think it mostly works for me. I think it's the writing is sharp enough to where even though it's not really what I would consider my style of humor, it's well done enough for me to appreciate it and like it, with a few exceptions. I mean, some of it is just like a little too overdone. Like there's a whole joke sequence about how there's like an egg that's actually a football, that's just like the classic joke of an egg being a football kind of thing. So I mean, overall, I think the humor, like I would describe it as like very, it's like an Ivy League kind of postmodern joke formula, like where everything is like an inside joke, and they're like, oh, like they're all, everybody's like holding like a glass of wine as they're talking about like their kind of high-minded humor kind of thing. Which it works for me to some degree, but I think it does.
It's going to turn some people off, I think.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, this is a game it is not trying to appeal to anybody. It is very much of its own mind, and it doesn't really care if you like it or not. Like that's the one of the major takeaways I have of it, is that it is really just doing whatever. And one of its greatest strengths, I think, is its unpredictability. In terms of, you don't know what kind of joke you're going to get. You don't know what you're going to see on your next run. It's going to throw something weird at you. Maybe it will stick, maybe it won't. But the draw is that you'll go in for the next run and you won't know what is going to hit you. And it plays with that lack of predictability in some interesting and, I would say, meta ways that I don't want to go too far into, because it could be sort of spoilery. I think that's part of it. That's better to explore yourself. If that's interesting to you.
I mean, I'm gonna be completely honest. I think you've won me over. I was definitely concerned about, like, concerned is such a weird, but like, I definitely didn't think that this was going to be a game that I vibe with, but seeing or hearing you talk about the stuff outside of the match 3, because I'm traditionally not a fan of like the match 3, concept. So that was definitely a big point, like a point of like where I paused. I was like, I don't know if this is going to be for me, but hearing you describe everything that goes on after that, and in addition to that, has sort of won me over. I do wonder if the humor is going to hit for me. Would you say in your 7 hours or so that you've played with it so far, like, has it lived up to the expectations that sort of the the gaming journalists that we follow, and like the sort of people who are like heralding it as this next great indie game, like, does it live up to that to you in your mind so far?
It does. Yeah, it's very easy to see why this is so like beloved, and why it's getting so much attention. There's I mean, really just from the opening hour, you can kind of see that it is something special. And again, it something special doesn't have to mean that it's going to be for everybody, or that everybody's going to enjoy it. I think that there's like some of the ways that it breaks the fourth wall is going to turn some people off. But I think even those people who don't enjoy it I would be hard pressed to say that this isn't something that's pretty unique.
Well, cool, man. I'm definitely going to give it a try. That is Titanium Court. I recommend that you guys give it a try too. It's out now on PC and Mac, and yeah, sounds like a good game to me. All right, Matthew, let's talk about our last game here, Vampire Crawlers. This is, like I said, the follow-up sequel ish, like it's pseudo sequel to Vampire Survivors, which came out and sort of introduced its own subgenre of the like roguelites, right? Like it's this like survivor horde surviving wave based take on it. And so what they've done here in the sequel, quote unquote, is they've taken that core formula and like the same weapons and power-ups and abilities, and instead of presenting it as like a 2D top-down sort of just average like twin stick shooter, it is a first person dungeon crawler. So like my mind goes to like the Etrian Odyssey series. Persona Q is a more recent series where it's like this first person dungeon crawling, but everything's still grid based. But then when you get into the battles, it's essentially a roguelike deck builder. So you're fighting enemies. Every time you level up, each time you kill enemies, you get these gems. Once you get a certain amount of gems, you level up, and then that's when you sort of start unlocking new cards, new abilities, new ways to improve your cards. And then obviously the sort of end result is you are taking out like these just swaths of enemies at a time. Like when you get into a battle, you're probably fighting anywhere between 15 and like 30 enemies at a time. Like it's all done on like this really huge scale and meant to make you feel like you're just taking out dozens of enemies like you would in a Dynasty Warriors game, right? Or a Muso game. So, like that's sort of like the main hook here. As I play through it, I really struggle because while I see how like the way that they've adopted the Vampire Survivors gameplay loop and some of the things that it did when it first came out into that deck builder dungeon crawling experience, I think a lot of that works really well and is really novel, but I think the actual core like deck building is virtually indistinguishable from any other roguelike deck builder that I've played, right? Like you are, every time you level up, you get a pick between 3 items. Sometimes they're going to be good. Sometimes you're going to get bad RNG, right? Like and another thing too is like a lot of the items and weapons, like I've started to get a lot of repeats. And a lot of them are essentially, it's like it's a whip, it's a knife, it's, like there's like weapons that aren't like very exciting. Now, one thing I would say that the game does well, or one interesting thing that the game does is in keeping with the, like adapting that Vampire Survivors gameplay, you can combine and evolve the different weapons and power-ups that you receive. So like, let's say I get a knife card, and then I get like a tome, like a lecturer's tome. I forget the actual name of the item, but there are combinations of items that you can then like fuse the cards together, and they stick to the same formula that Vampire Survivors had. So it kind of gives you a good starting point, if you do have that experience of having played the game, of like knowing different weapons and like how to get different weapons and different items and things like that. So there is this element of progression. It is just locked behind what I would classify as like just very run of the mill roguelike deck builder mechanics that like it frustrates me more. Like I wouldn't say more, but it frustrates me equally as I get the feeling of like, oh man, like I'm just clearing out dozens of enemies and like that dopamine hit.
Yeah, and I mean, when you're talking about progression, like, is anything carrying over between runs here, or is that all just like, are you losing everything run to run?
Yeah, I mean it's more or less the same sort of setup as Vampire Survivors, where like more or less you're losing everything, but there are permanent upgrades that you can purchase in between runs. I will say that was probably my least favorite part of Vampire Survivors, and it's probably my least favorite part here, just because those power ups, like they're very just run of the mill. Like, oh, like you start with more HP, you have more armor, you do more damage, and it's like nothing too exciting. One thing I will say in the way of unlocks is you are unlocking, similarly to Vampire Survivors, other survivors that you can then take and do dungeon runs with, and each one has like it's in true deck builder fashion, right? Like they have different perks and different abilities, and I think they do a decent enough job of introducing enough variety with those characters to where, like, even though the items and upgrades that I'm receiving for leveling up are all pretty similar and start repeating after a while, the starting points have a little bit more variance. So I do appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm like, my mind is comparing this to something like Ball Pit, which is one of the few kind of roguelike games that I've really fallen for in recent years. I mean, would you say like the obviously the gameplay is very different, but is the sort of amount of like the way it's class based, but it's also got a bit of meta progression? I'm guessing there's not like a a city building element of this in between runs or anything, but would you say there's about that level of persistence, I would say, in between runs? And how much of this, like, my follow-up question would be like, compared to like a Slay the Spire or something, where Slay the Spire gives you a wide amount of, like, it gives you a lot of latitude to build your deck the way you want in any particular run based on the cards you're finding. Do you feel like this really gives you the freedom to kind of craft and get like strategic about what you're doing with your cards that you're finding? Or is it kind of just like, is it not that deep and you're kind of just, you get what you get sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer that one first and go back to, talking about the progression in between, where like I think it's more just like you kind of have to get what you get and you deal with it, and that's, I feel like that's sort of discrediting the combination system, like the way that you can combine the different cards and get better, stronger cards. One thing I've totally glossed over as well is that there is like the sort of main rhythm to the game is that each card has like a mana cost, and you sort of like reach the level of like taking out these swaths of enemies by playing cards sequentially. So it's not about like finding cards that like compound with one another. It is purely about like, okay, I'm gonna play a card that's 0 cost, then go into a 1 cost, and then a 2 cost, and then a 3 cost. And as you increase that chain, the effects of those cards get more powerful. So if you're doing damage and you're playing a 3 card at the end of that chain, it's going to deal crazy damage. Or if you're, playing a card that gives you armor, it's going to give you like crazy armor.
I see. The little bit of like planning there with the big payoff, I see how that would be like very satisfying in bursts.
Right. And so like that's the main hook here. And I think like that in and of itself makes it fun, but I don't think there's enough around the game to like that, like I would put it on like the level of like a Slay the Spire. So to go back to like the progression and the like, I do wish there was something more in between the runs, similarly to like a ball pit. I you know, I don't want to say like, oh yeah, just do the city building thing again, but like city building would kind of fit here, you know, like you are going back to this town, you've got a, you know, a tavern where you're recruiting the new heroes, and like you're kind of like, you know, these different areas and touch points that you can go visit. But you know, it really just serves as like a hub where you can kind of gather yourself and then just go back out into the world. But yeah, so I mean, like to go back to the mechanic, you know, like the compounding and the stacking, like I do think it's novel. I just, you know, going back to the like the rogue nature of it is that like that also introduces another layer where like sometimes you're just getting cards that are all 0 cost, sometimes you're getting cards that are all 1 cost, and so, you know, where something like a Slay the Spire, you do feel a little bit more empowered as you're building your deck. This does feel like you have one too many constraints or one too many things to worry about, and so it does result in some runs that are just straight up like I get knocked out at the first boss, you know, like it's just not fruitful. So yeah, I haven't played Slay the Spire 2, and I've played a little bit of Slay the Spire 1, but I would, having heard what I've heard about Slay the Spire 2 and played what I've played about, you know, in Slay the Spire 1, I would probably recommend those games over this if you're looking for something that's like purely a deck building experience. Now, if you are a big fan of Vampire Survivors, like just that loop and those weapons, and like, you know, if you're a sicko who's got like 100+ hours in Vampire Survivors, you're probably already playing this and you probably already have 100 hours, but that's the person that I would recommend it to, because it really is novel how similarly they play to one another, like just in terms of like the progression and how you're powering yourself up. But like from a gameplay standpoint, like they're completely different games. So I think they did a good job sort of recreating that same feeling, but just in a different format. It's just that format is so saturated right now with so many really high quality deck builders that it's hard to recommend this over the other ones.
That kind of leads into what my last question is about this, which is, I mean, it seems like this Vampire Crawlers has been really successful. It seems like they've had a lot of success both critically and commercially. Do you think that, you know, you mentioned that this gives you this similar type of feeling as Vampire Survivors, despite being a different genre? Do you think that the success of this game is purely because of like, oh, like this is from the guy who made, you know, Vampire Survivors, I like that, I'll like this? Or do you feel that this is actually striking into something where, like, if this were the first game to come out and Vampire Survivors was going to be the follow-up, do you think this would still get, you know, the attention that, you know, the Vampire Survivors did, or this did at its release? Or is this purely like, you know, just kind of a riding on coattails thing?
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, I think the combination of deck builder and you know, like that grid based dungeon crawler, like I think there's something there that I'm glad that they made this game to put those two genres together, because I do enjoy it and I think it's fun. But I would say that like if this wasn't a Vampire Survivors, you know, I think this would have a harder time finding, you know, just mainly because of how saturated that deck builder, you know, like I said, in a year where Slay the Spire 2 is out in early access and by all accounts is like, you know, the best thing since sliced bread, at least the best thing since Slay the Spire 1. You know, it's hard to, you know, like I think it would be harder for this game to stand out if it didn't have that Vampire Survivors, like that name recognition.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, I mean, it's a good time. You know, like I said, if you were really into Vampire Survivors, you know, I think there's something here. I would say if you're into the, you know, like those, like, and that's another thing too, is like, I've never really been into those dungeon crawler kind of games, but I could see someone who is a fan of those games, but maybe hasn't played a deck builder, finding a lot to enjoy here as well. So it's a weird overlap of niches, but you know, I think you know, if you find yourself in that overlap, I think you'll have a good time here.
Well, cool. Yeah, I think this is probably a game that is not for me, knowing what I do and don't like, but I'm glad that the Vampire Survivor sickos have something to broaden their horizons with.
Yep, that is Vampire Crawlers, and I did lead with the full title of this. It is Vampire Crawlers, the Turbo Wild Card from Vampire Survivors. This is the full title, guys. So go out, play it, buy it. It is out on literally everything: Nintendo Switch 1, Switch 2, PS5, PC, Series X, iOS, and Android. It's out on mobile as well. So yeah, get in there, play it if you're a Vampire Survivors or a deck building sicko. But Matthew, we have gone on long enough talking about video games. I've had a blast, but we have to go. Once again, thank you guys for listening and joining us. If you guys haven't already, subscribe to us and leave us a review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to us on. Follow us, find us on whatever social network that you use at timekillerspod.com, and then be part of the show. DM us your questions, your comments, your hot takes, and we'll pick our favorites. But Matthew, anything you want to say to the good folks before we log off?
If you got any new alien planets out there for me to explore, let me know.
You know who to call.
That's right.
All right, y'all. We will, speaking of alien planets, we will be going to another one on the next episode in our Saros review. So be on the lookout for that. But until then, I love you guys. We'll talk to you later.
Peace.